Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
So we have a great panel today. My name is Daniel Bernstein. I'm the VP of Corum Group. I'm previously a CEO of a games company that I ran. I bootstrapped and I exited in 2011. That's enough. That's enough about me. And then I became an investment banker. So go figure. And I can talk about that in another time because that's a whole convoluted, long, and weird story. With that, I'd like to introduce Bob Berry, Eric Goldberg, Dan Fiden, and Lina Chen. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves one at a time. Let's start with Eric first.
Hi, I'm Eric Goldberg, and I've been in the games field for 35 years without time off for good behavior. In the last 12 years, I've served as an advisor, board member, consultant to 50 consumer-facing companies, of which 25 are in games. I can certainly list the ones that have exited, but then if I listed the ones that haven't, that would be way too long and would chew up all my colleagues' time. In any event, I've seen the field change, so the way that investment has changed over the last 10 years, and I'll also be giving a panel on the motivations and the incentives of the various types of investors at 1:30.
Thank you, Eric. I'm Dan. I am the CSO of a company called FunPlus. I've been in the game industry for not quite as long as Eric, but longer than Lina, certainly, I think. I started off on the development side, and then a few years ago was a co-founder at Signia Venture Partners and did the first investment in Super Evil Megacorp, did the investment in FunPlus, and now run Corp Dev and some other stuff at FunPlus.
Hey, I'm Lina Chen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Nyx Hydra. We make mobile games for young women. We raised just over $5.6 million, and then over the 600K was angel and the 5 was VC. We made a game called Egg Baby. It's a virtual pet egg that's really popular with young, teenage girls mostly.
Hi, I'm Bob Berry, CEO of Uber Entertainment. I've been in and out of the game industry for 25 years. Currently have a new VR startup as well called Envelop VR. I've done bootstrapped game projects, crowdfunded game projects, publisher-based game projects, you name it. So yeah, lots of different funding sources.
Awesome, thank you. So just to give you, here we go. The options that we'll talk about today are kind of organized into a bucket of 5. I would actually add another one at the end here. Bootstrapping, crowdfunding, getting a publisher to publish your game, angel financing, VC financing, and I would like to add strategic financing, and Eric can kind of touch on that along the way. And so there are all these opportunities to do that, and usually companies like to mix and match these different funding ways. For example, in my startup, I bootstrapped. Then I ended up raising angel financing. Unlike Lina, I didn't get to the VC side, and I was able to exit before that. But certainly there's a lot of opportunities available. Even though I guess angel and VC financing has become more conservative, there's still quite a bit of money out there. Bootstrapping, the benefits on that, you do get to keep your equity, right? So what happens with bootstrapping is you still own your company. Congratulations. So the $0 that your company is worth, you own all of that $0. Congratulations on that. But you do get to keep your IP. So if your IP is now worth $1 million, you are now worth $1 million, and you do get to keep all of it. The further you go down the road in bootstrapping, the more opportunity you get to maneuver down the road. So you wish to change direction, you wish to bring in new outside funding, you wish to bring on a strategic investor, you wish to bring on, raise an angel round or raise a VC round or run a Kickstarter campaign. The more you do up front and are able to kind of go down the path independently, the greater leverage you're going to have. Cons, you can go bankrupt. How about that? That's a big minus. and the self-publishing costs associated with both developing and marketing your product can also make it really very, very difficult for you to actually bootstrap. Okay, guys, any thoughts on bootstrapping?
Well, I was going to ask, when you say bootstrap, do you also include like, oh, we're going to do some work for hire over here, and then we're going to take the profits from that and roll that into our own thing?
That's a really good point, actually, because I think a lot of companies try that and end up realize like the margin on those work for hire deals is negative, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a good question. I mean, have you had good experience?
Well,
on that?
I mean, we bootstrapped Uber doing not game contract work, but just some like we were building some cutting edge technology for Intel, like for their Larrabee graphics chip, and it was a very, very lucrative tech contract that we were able to basically roll that and fund our entire first game, and then some.
Right.
And I was like, maybe we should just do more of those contracts. It was more lucrative than the games, but yeah, I mean that is one way to do it. But I've seen a lot of people get stuck on that treadmill of contract work, and they just can't break out of it. Yeah.
It's the received wisdom among the institutional VCs is that if you're doing work for hire, you're not a startup that they can fund. There are a couple of reasons. One is you get into a mindset of we should take the stuff that gives us guaranteed payment, and even though you have your dreams, your hopes, you get captured as the CEO or the studio head by putting it in. The second reason is that ultimately, if you're making the people who contract with you to do games are not going to be happy if they realize that you're making enough money to fund an original game that you don't own. What you did, Bob, is unusual because Intel had completely different objectives, so therefore did not mind that you were trying to set up a VR company or a game company. And congratulations for avoiding the trap of saying this work for hire stuff is luscious and we should just keep doing it.
Yeah, the funny part, though, is the initial business plan was to actually try to raise VC money, and that was right around March of 2008 when the economy just crashed and there was no money to be had at that time. So we just had to do what any startup would do, is pivot, try to do something else. Yeah.
I would also add that there's I think a personal element to work for hire studios that is in some cases counter to what makes a successful independent studio or studio that's focused on building its own IP. I think the skill set required to manage a large developer through a work for hire contract is very much a client services personality type, and I think that you have to ask yourself the question, if you're a great client services company, are you going to be a great entrepreneur? Are you going to be great at kind of ignoring the advice of many people who tell you what you're doing is foolish and building a big company anyway?
And just from a banker's perspective, it is very difficult to exit a client services company in the game space. And by difficult, I mean impossible, no matter how big the scale is. It's hard.
Yeah, and so for us, bootstrapping was not really an option because me and my co-founder, neither of us knew how to code, or we've never made a game before. We didn't know anyone in this industry, so there was just no chance. We were not going to be able to do it. Well, what we did do though, we learned how to code to make a very simple prototype, and then we raised Angel with that, but could not bootstrap.
Yeah, I think that I don't think anybody mentioned it, but I think one of the really obvious downsides to bootstrapping is games take money to make, and increasingly development budgets, especially on mobile, are increasing. The fidelity and complexity of games is increasing, and that doesn't come for free. Yes, tools like Unity are great. Yes, it's probably more efficient making games today than it was when I got into the industry, but I think the notion that you can build a synchronous multiplayer real-time strategy game for an amount of money that most teams can afford to bootstrap is not necessarily accurate.
Dan, how about your company? How'd you bootstrap that?
Well, it was a combination of bootstrapping and going out there and having a relationship with our first publisher, which was Wild Tangent. And back when when I did it, casual games were, and it kind of leads me to my next question. Casual games were a blue ocean. There was really nothing going on. There was only PopCap around, and they just launched Bejeweled. And so for us, it was fairly easy for us to enter the market with just with 4 or 5, 6 products. and test the market and have those be one of them be a success and kind of double down on that. The question that I have for you guys, is there an opportunity now for bootstrapping outside of the markets where it's no longer possible? I would say, in mobile, it really is impossible to bootstrap to a successful startup. You're better off, going out there and playing the lottery. I mean, you can win, but it's very difficult to do so. Are there areas where you think in the current gaming, in the current universe of game development where bootstrapping makes a lot of sense?
Maybe like smartwatches for the Apple Watch. It would be relatively cheap to make. I mean, you just have to.
Right.
Yeah.
And not a lot of applications on it.
Yeah, emerging platforms that don't have high like art requirements and things like that, where you can produce something on the cheap. That does make a lot of sense. Like Kendall back in the day. Like, it doesn't mean the platform's going to be successful or you're going to make money, but it's being first to a new platform that does take off could have a tremendous advantage. So.
Can you bootstrap VR?
That's kind of hard, but you can build on Unity, you can build on UE4. That accelerates you greatly,
right.
But doing good VR content takes a long time because there's so many unknowns right now and of what works and what doesn't work, what makes people sick, what doesn't make people sick. So we're kind of in this learning phase right now, and young startups that don't have a lot of cash to burn, don't have a lot of time, they don't really have the time to iterate through that. Maybe you can get yourself to a good enough demo to sell to angels or get a publisher deal or something like that, but that's a challenge, especially because of VR is still an emerging market. It's not, the consumer story is not there quite yet. So, yeah, that would be a challenge.
To build on what Bob said, with VR, not only do you have all the expenses attached to the visual requirements, but when you're going after a target platform that has not realized itself yet, that is, I mean, if you want to live dangerously, bungee jumping about 1,000 yards is a good way to do it. But doing a VR startup, if you want to go in that area, try AR, which is more established, and actually there is some capital available for it because Microsoft is funding it. But the issue is at least you're working with things like Google Maps and other lesser representations that cost a little bit less.
Is it more dangerous to start a mobile game company today or a VR company today?
Well, a VR company, there will be one or two wild successes out of the VR game companies that are out there, and every other one will fail if they follow the patterns of previous times. Because whenever you do something before the technology's basic use cases are established, someone argued that the VR use case was appear on covers of magazines with the promise of VR is almost here, but that's not a basis on which to build a game company. So mobile companies, it's a relatively well understood process. I hear that mobile phones are out there in relatively large numbers. The odds are against you, but I think you will figure out whether you're failing or succeeding and know whether to pivot. You will not get these signals at all from VR because you may not even have the configuration in which your audience is going to connect with your games.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about raising money down the road, I don't think you're going to have a lot of success for a VR game company raising money versus a mobile company because the potential upside just isn't there for investors, right? A hit game in mobile, we know what kinds of numbers those could do, but that doesn't exist in the VR space yet, and it won't until there's enough devices out there, and that's years away before there's a massive proliferation of VR headsets. So it's like, yeah, one of them is like definitely more blue ocean-y, but the ocean's not very large yet. Whereas then you've got the gigantic red ocean of mobile right now. Yeah, they're both risky in different ways.
Well, let's talk about that. Actually, the latest Morpheus is essentially a PlayStation, right? So then all of a sudden, you mind the gap, right? The gap is starting to get smaller and smaller and smaller for VR. So if I'm an investor, especially an investor that's willing to put in 10, 20, $30 million into a company, would I really bet that capital on a place where millions of entrants, all have have absolutely maximized their opportunity in this wide ocean of platform of mobile, or would I really go after something that could potentially be a much greater success and actually is showing a path to consumer adoption?
I mean, but you just run the numbers, right? How many PlayStations exist out there? It's like, what, 25 million or so?
Yeah.
How many headsets is Sony going to ship in the next year or 18 months? Not that many, right?
Right.
You're not going to have a Morpheus for every PlayStation out there. I think the attach rate's going to be not crazy high. It's not going to be bad, but they're going to be expensive. The headset's not going to be cheap, right? So, and then...
So was the first Kinect.
Yeah.
But the issue
I think
is,
they'll move units, but there's a manufacturing challenge as well of like actually getting the units out there. And then, there's going to be a good number of VR titles at launch. We're one of them, and I think it's pretty good. But still, doing the math for like if we sell the game for $10, $20, $30, whatever, multiplied by the number of potential units and the attach rate of the software, it's like from a total potential upside versus like a successful mobile game. It's like not even in the same universe, right?
yeah, but what people want is, there's a concept in professional investing, which Dan actually has practiced a fair bit, which is called taking a risk on a risk. VCs try to do it. If you don't know what the target of the device you're going to, if you look at the things that have gotten heavily funded, have gotten any funding, but noticeable funding in terms of being on the content side, they're device indifferent, like Jaunt VR, which has gotten, I think, a couple tens of millions. I don't know. And I will bet you, Bob, that you are trying to no matter what you're doing for your first game, you're ensuring that you have a device indifferent long-term plan, because you can't afford to pretend that you're smart enough to know which device is going to be the mass winner in the near term.
That's very true.
Dan, you were mentioning, yeah.
I was going to say something really funny and super insightful, but I can't remember what it was. So.
Eric has that ability.
I was lost in his eyes.
Dan, I never knew.
All right, so pitfalls. Yeah, you're likely to run out of money unless you kind of take your company to the next stage on bootstrapping. And Dan, maybe you can remember exactly what you're thinking in the meantime. Not projecting how much it will cost, and how long it will take, whether you're bootstrapping a mobile or a VR company or one of these, right? If you don't figure out what it's going to take for the market to catch up to where you want it to be, or for you to catch up to the market, then it's going to be trouble down the road. Do you remember yet?
Oh yeah, I was gonna actually make one comment about the cost of building games. I do think that raising a large amount of money, if your team's ambition and your company's ambition is to build the kind of games that are going to be competitive with every bootstrapped 3-person company all over the world, is I think a questionable strategy. I do think one thing to think about when you're going out to raise money is, does the money in and of itself provide me some product defensibility? Meaning, am I building the kind of game or the kind of technology that can't be built for free? Right? There are lots of people who make games just because they love games. Most people hopefully make games because they just love games. But that includes all kinds of kids in high school and people all over the world who just have Unity and they've got an idea for a game. Is the right thing to do to try to build Flappy Bird with $10 million of venture financing when the guy who built Flappy Bird is out there doing it wherever he lived and going to be competing on a relatively equal playing field with you in the app stores?
So what Dan's talking about is what's often referred to as unfair competitive advantage. If you're a professional venture investor, you want to know why there's a moat or why there's defensibility that will come out there. Going back to your comment about running out of money and things taking longer, that is a feature, not a bug. I describe usually as the entrepreneur CEO as the optimist in chief, and their job is to make promises that they believe. There's a wonderful phrase in Silicon Valley called promoting the truth, which when translated means it's not true now, but if you give me 6 months enough money, I hope to make what I've just claimed true. But the other thing is, an entrepreneur's job is to go out, is to build a bridge to what starts as a bridge to nowhere. In other words, there isn't enough money and enough resources to be able to put things together and to figure out how, in the middle of the process, to get to a successful outcome. So in terms of, if you are bothered by the fact that you don't have enough capital and so on and so forth to do something that you think can be done, then you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. If you are going after something that you know that there are resources available, that someone else has an unfair competitive advantage, like you need $30 million and you don't have access to that, that's something that you should say, no, I'd prefer to waste the next several years of my life in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Good. So thoughts on crowdfunding. So the pros to that are, you do get to keep your equity. That's another benefit. You get to fund your great idea, and by great idea, it's your project, right? So the project is the one that's receiving the funding, not you as a company, right? So you've got 2 or 3 games that you're working on, and you're hoping, okay, well, I'm going to do this crowdfunding for this one game, and it's going to operate my business. No, that crowdfunding platform is for that one game that you're promoting. You don't get the flexibility to, in the middle of okay, you've delivered, you've successfully gotten your goal, you blew through it. Now you know what, I'm going to make this into a different game. Well, good luck with that. And if you want to piss off everybody and essentially tank your company, that's exactly what you're going to do. The project is getting funded, not the company. And only specific projects get funding. Bob, you've been successful with Planetary Annihilation, getting Kickstarter funding for that. However, you've got this massive pent-up customer demand for the type of game that you've built. And the question that I have is, and that's one of the reasons why we avoided Kickstarter, is my company, my startup was really focused on casual games. And I'm also curious to hear Lina's thoughts on how she thought about Kickstarter and if she considered that opportunity there. But it's not for everybody. It's not for every project. It's certainly not for every company.
Yes. So when we did the Planetary Annihilation Kickstarter, there were only a handful of successful games that had Kickstarted before that. So, in fact, in the overall platform, we were the 7th most funded project in all categories of all time at that time. And there's been a lot of other successes since then. But yeah, it was 2.2 million on Kickstarter, then an additional, I think, 250,000 from PayPal from our own site. We didn't go the Chris Roberts route and rack up all the money on our own site, $85 million worth. But, you touched on a point about not having that flexibility and direction and changing the game. And I'm going to take that to the absolute extreme, right? We created a concept video that was our pitch video for Kickstarter that was as representative as we could possibly be for the game we were going to build, right? This was the promise that basically the backers look at it as this is your promise to us. You're building that thing that we just saw in the video. And we're very clear, it says, gameplay, visualization, this is not the real thing. And we produced a game that is closest to that concept video or concept art or whatever than any other game project I ever worked on in my entire life. It is the most aligned from that initial vision to what we shipped years later. And the fans still give us a hard time about well, you promised this one little detail. See that frame 34 and 35 in the background? There's this unit that could do this thing, and it's not in the game, so therefore you guys didn't deliver what you promised, and you're evil, right? And it is that extreme. I'm not exaggerating. We go on the forums, and anything that anybody from the team says, oh, we're thinking about doing feature X or thinking about doing feature Y, boom, it goes up on another forum. Confirmed, this thing's going to be in the game. John Maver said so himself. And it's well, we were just exploring ideas here. The more we try to involve the community in that process, the more they become, I don't want to say entitled, but they do take that sense of ownership over the project. But I think to the extreme, to where they feel if we don't make the game that they have in their head, then we're failing them.
Right.
Right. And we'll never be able to live up to that promise. So, Kickstarter has a lot of hidden drawbacks that we weren't aware of going in the first time.
Now, I heard the stat that for every dollar that you receive from Kickstarter or Indiegogo or something like that, 50% or 50 cents goes out to, and this is, a wide approximation or generalization perhaps, 50% goes to community management, or essentially managing the backseat development that a lot of your users do.
I suppose I could see people spending that much money on that kind of stuff, but no, not for us.
You guys didn't do that?
No, we did spend a lot of money on fulfillment for the promising physical goods for your Kickstarter. It sounds great on paper, but it is an absolute logistical nightmare. Especially when you're promising a lot of different things like statues and shirts and posters and collector's edition boxes and this and that. You actually have to produce all that stuff,
Sure.
and somebody's got to coordinate all that, and then you got to worry about shipping and fulfillment. It's actually been a nightmare.
Do you have any stats on how much that cost you of the original raise?
Put it this way: like shipping alone, fulfillment and shipping alone was $150,000. Right, just on international shipping, domestic shipping, and somebody packing all the goods and getting them out there. It was not cheap, And then there's also the cost of actually producing the goods. So several $100,000.
Yeah, in fairness, though, Bob's, to quote Scotty from Star Trek, you're a game developer, not a fulfillment guy. You're not a fulfillment guy. I've been involved with a couple of Kickstarters, one for a couple for computer games and a couple for physical goods games, but the physical goods producers already were in the fulfillment business, so they're able to do much.
Right.
The salient things for Kickstarter is between the amount of money that you're able to raise is dropping. In fact, between mid-2013 and mid-2015, there were no video game Kickstarters that got close to the number that Bob said. It was not until Brian Fargo's next Interplay production resuscitation, and then of course Shenmue blew through it, that no one topped 1.5 million during that period. Another issue is Kickstarters raise what the market will bear, not the amount you need. You have to understand that Kickstarter is a marketing medium. It is not a funding medium. You may need 2.6 million or you may need 1.2 million to do your project. That is not, you have no guarantee you can raise it. It is completely different from any of the other sources in that you can't say this is the amount of money I need. It is the market will give you what the market is willing to do in the time that you have it available. And that is probably the single biggest risk. If you think it's going to fund your entire project, then you almost certainly will fail in the 2015-2016 market.
All right. Dan, Lina, did you guys have any thoughts on Kickstarter? What you guys did?
Yeah, so we thought about crowdfunding for like a second, and then it was like, no, that's obviously a terrible idea for us because the people who are on Kickstarter, the users of those sites, are not our target demographic at all. I mean, we're looking at our target demographic is like teenage girls and like college women, like they're not hanging out on Kickstarters. They're not there.
Are there alternative direct funding platforms for those demographics, or could you have thought through some of those?
Not that we know of, and I think it's not a culture. They don't have a culture of like funding games, right? So.
All right. Dan, any thoughts?
More a question for the people who have more, I think, experience for Kickstarter. Is Kickstarter? I mean, are we going to see a big, massive, like, class action lawsuit over?
Great question. Yep.
Over, some $100 million game that never ships or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, for the vast majority of the money that Star Citizen has raises on their own website, right? They only did a small portion of that on Kickstarter. So even if that completely fizzles out and tanks and dies, I don't think it's actually going to have that much of an impact on Kickstarter itself. I have no data to back that up. It's just an intuition thing. I think it'll be fine. And it goes back to what he was saying about you can raise what the market will bear, and there are highs and lows. And we were one of those games. Our second Kickstarter is one of those games that didn't reach its goal. We did one called Human Resources. And we made the mistake of asking more towards what we would actually spend making the game, and basically exposing a number that really you don't want to expose to the end user at all. When we asked our raise on Planetary Annihilation, we asked for 900K. We can't make a game for 900K. That's not. We just don't have the ability to do that. We're too big, and the games we're trying to make are too big. We knew we were going to spend substantially more than whatever it is that we raised, unless we really blew through the roof. But 2.2 million is kind of where we were expecting to land when we raised the money. So, and we had a pool in the office. The range was 1.5 million to 3. And we landed at 2.2, and we were pretty happy with that. But we knew we're going to spend more than $2.2 million on this game, right? Supreme Commander, the closest kind of data point to the type of game we're making, cost $12 million to make, right? So, and that's for PC games. I mean, that's kind of a mid-core game. That's a mid-level budget. It's not huge and it's not small. So we knew we would spend substantially more, but the backer audience, they don't understand the concept of video game development economics at all. And we can sit there and try to explain it to them, but they're either unwilling to hear what we have to say, they just want to ignore it, or I don't know. We'll have responses of like, "There's no way you could possibly need $900,000 to make a video game. That's crazy talk. My brother makes $30 an hour doing this and that, and he could program it." It's like, well, how do you argue with that, right? So we just choose not to argue anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, I want to say one more thing. So yeah, Human Resources was a Kickstarter that we put on. It failed. We asked for 1.4 million. Which was actually closer to what we would really spend on making that game because it's being built on existing technology. But it failed for multiple reasons. Like, we can't point to any one particular thing. We think the market was softer. We also think there was blowback from our previous Kickstarter where there was this thought that, we haven't fulfilled our promises, and look, they're doing another Kickstarter even though they haven't finished this other game, and then we have our permanent negative detractors that will follow us to any game that we go just so they can poo-poo on us.
Right.
Like that's where they derive their livelihood from, is just being negative on whatever it is that we do. They don't play our games. They just want to go and troll our forums. So,
well, but that was intentional. You guys actually, like you would, it was likely that you would, barely hit the goal. But back to Eric's point about it being a marketing platform, barely hitting the goal of Kickstarter is not a good way to introduce your game.
That's why we pulled it halfway through.
Right. Well, the other thing is Bob gives an excellent illustration. In a Kickstarter, you want to go past the minimum number, ideally in the first day and certainly in the first weekend. On the other hand, so that forces you to choose a number much lower than the actual development cost. To Dan's question, the answer is literally that there will be a class action lawsuit because it's written in the Constitution that everyone has the God-given right to sue. However, I think there will not be a serious class action lawsuit for two reasons. One is that the failure, and there are at least three major titles that have failed, have not delivered in 3 years. So they're coming really soon now, but have completely passed any expectation that they'll show up. And the reaction that the audience has given is that's why the highs and the average funding amounts in video games are going down, because a certain amount of trust has been broken with the user base. And there are many people who, they're not just people who go after Bob personally. They're people who are bitter that they back something with people who are not able to deliver, and they lower the median raise. The other issue is that several of Dan's former peers, several of the top venture capitalists, said, what's going to happen when you back a project and someone gets very well, the company makes several hundreds of millions off that. Chen, when he was at Norwest, said this, Lasky at Benchmark. Well, it happened. Oculus Rift was backed. They exited for $2 billion, and that's before Facebook stock levitated. And there was not, there is a spectacular example of the field with remarkably little blowback.
Right.
So I would argue that, yes, there will be a class action because there are always lawyers with idle hands who want to be the devil's play, but there will not be a serious one affecting it. It's more an erosion of trust.
Good. Okay, let's talk about getting a publisher as a and if it's even viable at all. Pros, you get to keep your equity. Well, not that. That's actually sometimes. A lot of times the publisher has rights to your equity. Has rights to your either warrants or actually takes a part of your business. You do get money for the development. Focuses on the project. So come hell or high water, they want their game, no matter what happens to your business. You're likely to lose the IP. You're likely to lose rights to the IP at the very least, whether it's sequel rights or whatever have you. You have less flexibility to change direction, I guess. Instead of 30,000, 40,000 rabid fans, now you've got to convince, there's a company of 100 that is actually continuing to write you checks, that you want to make sure that you keep them happy. Yeah. So, any thoughts on publishing? And here's an opportunity also to talk about what publishing means in all the different market segments that is games, right? Is there opportunities for publishing within VR, mobile, what have you?
This is a conversation Dan and I just had before this, and how this concept of a publisher has been evolving and changing. I mean, it's a radically different world now than the packaged goods days, where the primary value of a publisher was like securing your retail shelf space, that Walmart end cap. That had tremendous amount of value because independent developers, they can't do that on their own. They didn't own, and the publishers would control those distribution channels, and they had them locked down very tightly. It would take something like a Derek Smart move to go into electronics boutique and sell it yourself, and he was actually managed to do that. One of the very few instances I've ever heard of anybody doing that. Right. So, and then, magazine ad marketing, advertising, stuff like that. So in these days, what does a publisher actually do, right? Besides provide money, right? That we're not worried about distribution channels in physical distribution channels, right? Mobile distribution channels are fairly clear. So what value add do they provide, right? So now we've got this, and you've got a great slide in there, the iceberg slide, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Jump into that. There's the game development at the top, and there's all this other stuff down at the bottom. And I think that's where the modern publisher is going to bring a lot of new value, right? At Uber, we worked our first mobile free-to-play game, and our last mobile free-to-play game was with a company called Tilting Point, which is the first time we ever worked with a publisher in all the games that we ever made. And they were basically handling that bottom part of that iceberg there for us because, we just realized this is not an area of expertise that we have, and we don't necessarily want to grow that. We want to focus on the craft and the art of making a great game. And so we did realize some value there. They provided funding, and they provided all of those other things that not only did we not really want to do, but we wouldn't be good at if we tried. So. That new type of publisher, I think there's a good niche for them there. It's more like an operations publisher.
Dan, you're most of that iceberg.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't want to restate too much of what we said, but I think the real answer is that on mobile in particular, we don't know for sure what a publisher is going to be. But in the packaged goods retail space, the distribution piece of the publishing business was very capital intensive and very defensible. And that's what made, over time, the great big packaged goods publishers the kind of most powerful companies in that part of the business. What is the defensible part of mobile publishing today? It's kind of a difficult question. There are certainly companies out there with a lot of reach. There are companies out there with a lot of capital that can spend incredibly aggressively on user acquisition. But does that actually prevent magically great games from climbing up the charts? No, it doesn't. They have no monopoly on that distribution. They have advantages, but I think kind of Mike Marchetti, who I used to work with, drilled into me that any business needs to be able to say, your margins are my opportunity, and financing, marketing spend, if I'm willing to take slimmer margins than my competitors, I can take that away super, super easy. So what is it that you can take away as easily? I mean, our thesis at FunPlus is now games are accessible very frictionlessly globally. And games work globally. Games work, Clash works for people all over the world. But they're service businesses now. And when you're running a service business like Zappos runs a service business, you actually need to take care of your customers in kind of a magical way. And it's not just events and sales and all the other crap, answering CS complaints in a reasonable amount of time. How do game companies evolve to a place where they can provide every day kind of a magical experience inside of their games such that players start to think about them in the same way that I think about Disney World? When I compare it to Six Flags. Like the experience at Disney World is this like incredible, magical service experience that isn't about the height of the roller coasters or anything. It's really about this something else. And our belief is that that something else and delivering that something else at global scale requires people. It requires a footprint kind of all over the world. Thai players need to be talking to Thai game managers and community managers and Thai marketers and that's what we're investing in building, and that's what we try to provide our partners as a publisher. We think that's right, but it's a new thing, so we'll find out in a couple of years.
Yeah, and I would point out, like, based on that. Oh, go back to slide 1 second.
You want to go back to them?
Just 1 second. So if you look at if you draw the line, if the horizon there is publisher down below and developer up top. And they're providing all the funding at the same time, what kind of leverage do you think you have in negotiating this publishing deal, right? They're doing what looks like the bulk of the work, like it looks like it. Hey, I'm a game developer. I'll defend the development side, but they've got a very strong case for, getting a large percentage of the revenue, getting control of your IP. You don't have a lot to negotiate with there. So that's one of the reasons that it's not very an attractive model for me.
Yes, the individual developer, that's true, Bob. But for the developers in general, it's not true. If you're a publisher, you need two things. You need to have hits, and you need to have a product line. The point at which we had the changeover from the traditional thinking was when Temple Run blew out. And a number of the big publishers called Amanji, the publishers, and said, "We're publishers. We can deliver all these advantages." And Amanji said, "We're making money hand over fist. Yes, we're only two or three people, but we're able to do this. Why do we need this?" And as a result, publishers started to change, that they would take bets on titles, that they would give resources earlier and promise marketing support, development support, because they had to place more bets on things that they thought could be hits. So an individual developer doesn't have an advantage until a publisher decides that they have a good chance of delivering a hit, at which point they have enormous leverage, and the stuff underneath is not as important because the publisher is already paying for that, and they need the hits, or at least the products, to fill the pipeline.
Hey guys, this is a good entree to talk about a little bit about what it means to do strategic deals with publishers that actually exchange equity for some of the stuff underneath, right? So whether or not that's driven by the publisher or that's driven by the developer, and what exactly the pros and the cons of more equity-based deals with publishers.
Yeah. So the way that is this on? Yeah. Hello. The way that we think about it, and we do both kinds of deals. We're going to invest because we understand kind of what it means to run a game as a service. We're going to be partnering and deeply involved with the ongoing operations of the game for the next X years. It's going to be a long relationship. We're investing a lot, not just of money, but our resources, which are our people, which is kind of what constrains us more than anything else. And so we need some participation in the thing that we're investing in. That either means in a traditional pub dev deal where we're financing the development and taking a rev share on the back end. It means we're going to have ownership in the IP, or it means we're going to have ownership in the company. And either is fine with us, honestly, as a kind of a strategic investor. For developers, I think that what I generally ask developers when I talk to them about this is, like, listen, when you wake up in the morning and think about why you're getting up and going to work, is it because of this game or is it because of the company? You know, because the way that you structure your financing should be aligned with that. And I think right now it seems as though many developers kind of have a preference for equity financing that I don't always understand, honestly, as someone who's made a lot of games in the past.
And I, as a banker, really don't understand. So, for example, I do a deal with you, right? So, you have 10% of my company. Awesome. You know what? EA just came to me and wants to buy my company. Oh shit. Okay, what do I do now, right? So, I don't know if how much of that is thought through, but this is an issue. When you take money from a strategic, what happens to your company when you try to exit? And I don't know how much thought has been given. Developers give to that particular issue.
There's a whole set of issues around this. The issue is when a publisher does equity financing, it is a tertiary goal. You only have 100% of equity of your company. You're always putting yourself at risk when you ask the person owning a piece of their company who doesn't particularly care about it. The first priority the publisher cares about is this a good title? The second thing they care about is this an ongoing relationship? First have it deliver. The third thing they care about maybe is whether or not they have a stake in the company. So you have an asynchronous arrangement.
Right.
You care about your company deeply because it's the asset you have and the asset you're building, but your publisher may care, but it cares after two much more important priorities, and that's before. And you get into all sorts of hazards about. In your example, FunPlus invests, EA is interested. FunPlus probably has to be notified this is going on, which is a disincentive for EA because publishers are suspicious about it. There's a whole set of things. There's a list of other things like that which we don't have time, but
Yep.
You want somebody who cares about when they make the investment in you, you want them to care about your equity investment because of equity, not because, oh, this is a nice thing that I'm also getting.
And we have about 5 minutes to delve into angel and VC financing, so I'm going to lump them together. Angel financing gives you money for development, and it's really an investment into your company, not into your project. So they're going to be aligned at an exit. You have the flexibility to switch projects or choose what direction you want to go into, or maybe, okay, well, we started out mobile games, we'll realize there's a better opportunity here in VR. We're going to do that. No one's going to be really pissed off. In fact, your angels are probably going to be very happy that you made that decision to pivot your company before you ran out of money. You got a loss of equity that happens, of course, a more complicated cap table, and now the switch that goes off. And Lina, I'm really curious about your thoughts on both angel and the VC side. Now your focus is no longer, okay, I can run this forever. It's a lifestyle business. Your number one priority, if you take in $1 from anybody else, is to return that money plus whatever opportunity money that you're going to make for them that's greater than what they would by placing it into the stock market or into a CD, right? So something that actually returns a substantial amount of money to the investors. That is your number one priority. Your number two priority is, okay, I really love my job and this is a lot of fun. So with that thought, some thoughts on angel financing. Also, the common pitfalls to that. I talk a lot about the valley of death. What happens? You've raised a seed fund, and all of a sudden, you don't have enough money to essentially. You're not big enough for a VC to care, and you're too small enough for angels to continue to invest into you. That's an issue there. VC financing. There are no base hits for VCs, and I know there's been plenty of talk in this today about what VCs expect. VCs expect you to build a big company, a very profitable company, and they're willing to let you go zombie if you don't, even if you're making some money but not a lot of money. So
profitable
anyway,
is sometimes relevant.
Huh?
Profitable is sometimes relevant.
Right. Profitable is good. Yes.
Dan speaks from bitter experience.
Well, not VCs. And Lina, that's what I'm curious. I mean, how are you thinking about your company now that you've raised 2 rounds from angels and VCs?
Well, so Angel and VC is perfect for us because we never set out to make a game. We set out to make a media company for young women eventually, right? And like it fits with our personalities because we're very much like we're gonna go the biggest this can get. Like eventually, like, hopefully IPO in like 5 to 10 years. That's what like as big as we can go. Eventually, like the Viacom for girls, basically, right? So it fits very well, and we'll get the money back somehow. Like either it's IPO or like a big sale at some point. But I'm not interested in lifestyle companies, so it fit me pretty perfectly.
Right.
And neither is my co-founder, obviously.
And I think that's really, that attitude is the only correct one for going out and raising that kind of money.
That's right.
It's your focus is on building a big company, not focus on making a great game. Right. So if you're of the type of like, I'm very creative and I want to express myself and I want to create a good video game and yeah, I'm going to have to deal with some of that money stuff and the user acquisition or this or that, but my focus is on great games and original IP and things like that, you're going to have a very, I would think you don't go out and try to raise angel money and VC money because you're going to have a hard time getting anybody to invest in that. Right. And in that particular case, now the value that you're building in your company is now really based around the IP that you're creating, right? And that is not, I don't think, something that investors are going to find very attractive. They're investing in business models and strategic advantages and things like that. How if you pitch them like, well, I'm just going to make another Clash of Clans but better, you're not going to get investment, right? Like you're going to have something that really sets you apart, that they believe that you have an unfair advantage and
right.
You can succeed where others don't, or you're in a completely underserved market that nobody's addressing, and you can be the big fish in that pond, right?
And Dan and I we talked about this as well, where there's you go out there and you pitch investors on the fact that you're going to be number 78 on the App Store. Not interesting. You're either like you either have aspirations and maybe even a track record of being number one, or just don't go talk to them. Figure out another way to get your money.
Just a quick add though, so that's totally true. And then but in the company there should be someone who is very creatively passionate too, obviously.
Right.
I didn't mean to suggest otherwise, yeah.
I would actually argue that if this is something that the VCs tell you, and especially in California where there's a fascination with unicorns, companies that are worth $1 billion or more. On the other hand, if you look at the economics of the venture field, it's simply not true. Mm-hmm. There are only, even if every single company that's valued at $1 billion makes an exit, there's nowhere near enough to go around for the number of venture funds out there. There are plenty of companies that would be, plenty of venture firms that would be willing to continue with a double rather than a home run. And anyone investing in mobile at this stage is perfectly aware that the number 1 through number 5 slots are probably not available to them. So I think, well, as someone who has not done this before, you have to understand you have a responsibility to try to make the best possible return on investment, and you also have to build something that that you have to aim for something that causes, the general metric is a 10x return. Understand that there are many companies that have exited at 2x to 5x where the entrepreneurs have gotten next chances and have gotten favored position for next chances. So the assertion that the venture community is making to you that go big or go home is by their own actions and by the results bullshit.
With that, I actually want to open up to some questions. Anybody has yeah, let's go ahead. The iceberg slide.
I'm the CFO for a company that is sort of pivoting out of digital media. We made a bunch of games for some pretty big clients and big IP, and we're looking to do some licensing deals. And as we start to do research on this, what we're starting to realize is that the people who are super successful in mobile aren't necessarily great game developers. They're really the bottom half of that iceberg. They're user acquisition experts, they're monetization experts, things of that nature. What's going on with mobile? Is there ever going to be a case where you can make a great game and it's not going to be all about comparing your lifetime value to acquisition costs?
I disagree with that kind of wholeheartedly. Like Supercell, they're an easy one to pick out, but they're tremendous game developers. Yeah. The games that they've made are not the most original games in the world, but they're made with like absolute care. If I was to knock Supercell at all, which I think is tough to do because they're terrific people and very talented, I think they're a much better game development company than they are a service operations company. They do, in my opinion, they don't operate those games as rigorously as they should. I mean, the kind of event and sale and all the other happenings in those games, it's nowhere near kind of the level of what Machine Zone does, for example. I think that they can improve there, but I think they're awesome game developers.
And their seed investor, Jari Ovaskainen, who is probably the most successful angel investor in games in Europe, will only invest in companies that do that. Now, the odds are extremely long. I mean, I had the privilege of working with the Supercell team at 2 companies previous, and unfortunately, I missed working on Supercell, but they went at 3 times. They always cared about. They did great games for Mobile Games 1.0, which was for feature phones. They did great games for. They actually mistimed the switch to Apple and to the iPhone and so on and so forth. But there are a number of companies that are only focused on doing good games. Amanji. They found one type of game that they do extremely well. Rovio famously did 53 failures before they got to Angry Birds. Now, again, it's quite public that Rovio has been poor on the service side and switching to free-to-play. So you can argue that there's a very small population of companies that succeed by doing great game designs, but they include at least half the companies that are in the top 20 of the charts outside of Social Casino.
Guys,
I mean, I think. Sorry, just
no, go ahead.
great. I think Candy Crush, in my opinion, is just like a beautifully crafted game. It isn't Monument Valley, but everything doesn't have to be Monument Valley. I think Two Dots is like a beautifully crafted game. It isn't the most original game in the world, but I think. I guess what I would say is conflating sheer innovation and originality and kind of something like Monument Valley or lots of other really great indie games that are kind of coming out right now and popular games and kind of dismissing them as not good game developers, I think is a mistake that game developers make too often.
Next time this slide is going to have the iceberg, and it's going to have a speedboat, and it's going to have Monument Valley on the speedboat. Guys, thank you very much. Terrific panel. Really appreciate it.